Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. Today we're checking out a case that you guys have requested probably more than any case in the last month or so, but before that, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on that little bell to receive notifications. In today's video, we're checking out the new NZXT H1 V2. We all know what a hot mess the original H1 was with all of the recalls and whatnot. And let's see if NZXT fixed their second foray into small form factor. Let's take a closer look. Alrighty, let's start off with panel removal. This should be relatively the same as the original H1. You just pull down here. You should pull the front side first, but you know, it doesn't really matter too much. It's okay, guys. Same deal, pull the front panel. I noticed that these panels are a lot easier to pull off, which kind of freaked me out with the glass panel on the original H1. And the top panel, or the whole white part of it, should just slide off like that. It's got a rail system. The original H1 was exactly the same. This case is slightly bigger, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure the comment section will let me know everything I need to know about this case. But the inside of the outermost shell for the NZXT H1 V2 has removable dust filters as well. And to remove them, it's fairly easy. Basically, you just lift them up because they're magnetic. So we will be testing thermals with and without these filters. If you're not familiar with the NZXT H1, the idea behind the case is it's got a power supply and a liquid cooler integrated into a small form factor case. So there's less guesswork for you trying to figure out what's gonna fit and more time using your PC. The next part is actually getting access to the internals, which is done basically with two screws. So you've got this screw here, which is now captive actually. These weren't captive before, so I can already see some improvement here. It just means that you won't lose your screws, and once you loosen them, the AIO will fold down, and now you've got access. In terms of motherboard support for the NZXT H1, it only supports ITX boards. However, there's one additional factor that you need to take into account when you're building in this case, and that is RAM clearance. So you're looking at a maximum RAM height of 46 millimeters. Anything higher, and it will hit the cooler. Included in the H1 is a very similar 140mm liquid cooler. The issue that I have with these liquid coolers are the original H1 that I had was starting to make some really bad noises. So these 140mm AIOs have the pump integrated into the radiator. Essentially what's happening is, and I know people will argue till the cows come home about this, but you're losing radiator surface area by including the pump in the radiator itself. There's a few reasons why they do this. The first thing is a patent that applies to this type of liquid cooler, and for licensing reasons, it's cheaper for them to use a cooler like this than to license an Acertech based one for every single case that they sell, right? The other argument will be is that the fan hub is basically on top of the pump anyway, so it won't actually impede performance too much, but you're losing some of the radiator vanes as well, which help with cooling. So also for packaging reasons, it makes it easier in the sense that there's less cables running to the pump top itself, and everything just comes straight out of the radiator. As you can see here, the pump top has pre-applied thermal paste, and it's got an Intel bracket on there installed already. In terms of mounting hardware, it's got a few kits. So here's the LGA 1700 kit. So if you're using a 12th gen ITX board, they've got you covered here with the back plate and the correct size standoffs and screws and whatnot and everything you need to get up and running. There's also a kit for AM4 and the older LGA 115X and LGA 1200 boards. So shouldn't have any issues with that either. Almost anything from the last 10 years will fit in here with zero to no issues. Some of the biggest upgrades with the H1 V2 is mainly about compatibility and accessibility. So here's something new, for example. So you've got this panel that says lift here to release. If we pull this panel down, you'll notice it now has a little NZXT fan controller that will control the pump, the CPU fan and rear fan through USB. So you can use NZXT's CAM software to control everything with the case, which they didn't have with the original. This is a nice little addition. Another new addition is the power supply. The original H1 had a 650 watt power supply. This now has a 750 watt power supply. And this is something that I mentioned in one of our GPU videos where we tried to fit different GPUs into here. And I said, over time, the 650 watt power supply is not going to be enough. And I feel like they kind of listened to what I said and upgraded to a 750, which is actually more than enough for most GPUs, even 3080s and 3080 Ti's with this type of configuration. Because remember, you're basically just running a motherboard, a CPU, and a GPU. You can't really fit that much more than that in here other than maybe 1 or 2 SSDs. Much like the original H1, there are 2 SSD mounts as well. So basically you can only do 2.5-inch drives in these slots here. And the way this works is you just push the drive in and it will clip in, and it's kind of like on, I'll say like a spring-loaded mechanism. So if you lift the clip up here, it will actually slide the drive back out easily. And you can then just plug everything in from this side here. Another upgrade with this case here is the riser cable. This is now a PCIe Gen 4 riser cable, and you can see that the ground plane itself is completely different to the original, so there shouldn't be any risk of it shorting out and catching fire, kind of like the isolated incidences that we saw with the original H1. Hopefully we don't see a repeat of all of that. The keynote out there would have noticed something completely different, and I think this is a great change to the H1. There's now a 92mm exhaust fan to help with additional cooling for the GPU to get all of that hot air out of the case and away. You'll notice that all the cables are pre-routed on this case, and it even includes 3 8-pin PCIe power connectors. So for GPUs that require this much juice, you now have that option, which is a nice addition as well. And they are all separate cables, so it's not using any splitters. It's 3 separate cables from the power supply for the most efficient power delivery. Everything's tied down to the case to support most ITX boards and most cable placements. It's almost a standard now with these type of boards and basically where you plug stuff in, so you shouldn't have a problem fitting anything in. So you got your front panel connectors, the same stuff as usual. You got your front panel audio, you've got your USB 2.0, which is for the controller. You've got your front panel connector, which is on a single block, which is nice for a case like this because it takes the guesswork out of trying to figure out what everything is. There's also a USB Type-C front panel connector. Behind there is a USB 3.2 front panel connector. For the front panel connectivity, you've got a power button / combined power light, 2 USB Type-A ports, which is new. It only had 1 before, a USB Type-C port, and that combined headphone and microphone jack. Another thing that's new with the NZXT H1 V2 is GPU clearance, because the case is now 15.6 liters. So you've got a little bit more internal volume. So NZXT is claiming that the maximum GPU length is 324 millimeters. So we're gonna do what we always do. We're gonna do the ye old Strix test, but I've also got a Gaming X Trio, which is slightly larger, to show you if it's gonna fit or not. So we'll start off with the RTX 3080 Gundam from ASUS, and this card quite easily goes in and it lines up with the PCIe riser very easily. There's also enough clearance for the thickness of the card too, because this is a full fat triple slot card, so you shouldn't have any issues with it. I'm not even gonna bother using anything smaller than this because it's going to fit. So let's try a card that is technically bigger. We'll go for the 3080 Gaming Z Trio, which, yeah, like I said, is bigger. And again, fits in with no problems, and it plugs in too. I did test this off camera, so you know, that's one of the major questions that we get with these type of cases is, you know, GPU clearance. And it looks like the GPU clearance here is pretty exceptional. If I had a bigger card than this card, which I don't, I would test it. The included accessories are the same as usual. You've got your zip ties and whatnot. You've got your headphone and microphone splitter connector. You've also got an adapter for the front panel wiring if your case is slightly different as well. They also include a power cable for your region. And if you're from another country and you've never seen the Australian power connector, here you go, ladies and gents. That's everything I think you need to know about the case for now. But let's do our usual thing. We'll do a build, we'll test the thermals, do all that jazz, and then I'll let you know what I think about the H1 V2. Wait a second, right? Let's do this differently. Let's show you how easy this case is to actually build in and show you how long it takes if you're building at a regular pace without rushing. So let's do that. It's been a while, but let's visit our friends over at Corp. Ooh. Ooh. That was really good. But I have one complaint, one really massive complaint. Why didn't they put that caution sticker on top of the plastic? It was so good. And I don't care, I'm leaving it on. Because yeah. All right, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed that timed build in the NZXT H1 V2. Let's find out what the thermals are like with this build though. What you're seeing on your screen right now is with all the panels off, obviously the thermals aren't too bad, but you're not gonna be running the PC like that. So if we take a look at the thermals with the filters taken out, the thermals are about what you'd expect. For the thermal profile, I actually set it to performance mode in NZXT Cam for the CPU fan and the rear fan. I will say though, the 12700K is quite a warm CPU, so with this type of benchmark, it gives you a realistic look at what those thermals would be. They are a little bit on the high side, but the CPU does not throttle whatsoever. But if we put those filters back in, you can see that it gets very, very hot on the CPU, going over 90 degrees, which is very hot. Here's something I thought you guys might find interesting. I was gonna compare this in size to other cases, but I thought rather let's do a quick comparison between the H1 and the H1 V2 so you can get an idea of how much bigger they made the V2. Truthfully, it doesn't actually feel like it's that much bigger than the original. If you do look closely, you can see the differences. Now, with these quick side-by-side comparisons, I film it this way so we don't warp the perspective of the cases as we're looking at them, and it gives you guys a nice side-by-side comparison and just a quick look at the cases. All right, the hardware. The CPU is the Intel Core i7-12700K. We put the 12700K on the ASUS ROG Strix Z690i gaming Wi-Fi. The RAM is 16 gigs of crucial DDR5 memory at 4800 megatransfers. And the GPU is the ASUS ROG Strix RTX 3080 Gundam Edition. Okay, the H1 V2. The changes they've made with the power supply, increasing the capacity to 750 watts, is something that I had recommended in the past for people who wanted higher capacity GPUs that drink a whole lot more juice. So it's nice that they've decided to include that right out of the box with the V2. In terms of that rear exhaust fan, I don't think it makes a huge difference for this type of GPU, but for the Founders cards, it will make a much bigger difference. But I decided not to use a Founders card basically because I wanted to know what it would be like for these really big GPUs, and I wanted to know if it would fit. So that's that. In terms of the riser cable, I think they might have addressed those issues, but only time will tell. I mean, this case is still quite new. We haven't had heaps of time with it yet, but from what I can tell, it is a lot better. The included fan hub is a nice addition, plugs into the USB 2.0 header on your motherboard and allows software control for the fan on the CPU cooler and the rear fan in NZXT Cam, and it detects that way too, so you can just control them. You can do custom fan curves and everything like you can with other NZXT coolers. However, it's like, hey, you've got an H1, let's configure it. There's a couple things to note with this case as well, and this will probably apply to the H1, but a lot of these new Z690 ITX boards, the M.2 heat sinks, they use like a mezzanine card and it's really high, and that can be a little bit of a problem for a case like this. So in the section of the video where I talked about all the specifications of the case, I talked about RAM height. Another thing to consider for this case is not just the RAM height, it's also the height for the M.2 heatsink, and like this board from ASUS, it's higher than the RAM. What this might introduce in the future would be an issue between the heatsink and the fan on the H1. Now, I will say that the tubes for the AIO, I had to route them slightly differently to the way that you would with a board that doesn't have a high heatsink for the M.2, and I passed it around the side of the fan to make it fit. It is very, very, very tight. So if you are using this board and you are thinking to yourself, is this actually going to fit? The answer is yes, but the one caveat being, you actually have to reduce your maximum RAM height so the pipe will go around, because the pipe is sitting on the end of the RAM module, so that 46 millimeters or whatever the RAM clearance is does not apply with this motherboard. So be very, very careful with your motherboard selection. One other thing to note as well is with this GPU in particular, what I found is this card is within the specifications of this case, however, right? And I'll demonstrate this for you guys now. You'll notice when you slide the top panel of the case, it gets stuck on the GPU. And we actually encountered this with the original H1. If you are using filters on the GPU side, it makes it more difficult. The way that I found to make the GPU fit is to push the GPU in and then slide it up. It's not ideal, but it does work. And basically every single cross beam on the filter will get stuck on the screws on the GPU, or the fascia of it rather. And you just need to be careful. So look, if I drop it down now, that's where it's stuck. But if I push the GPU in now, it slides down. So just take that into account. I can already anticipate people saying, oh, this GPU is not going to fit. Just do that. It fits no problem. And the fan does not touch those filters. My recommendation is do not use the filter on the CPU side, right? That's basically all I've got to say. When we did our original NZXT H1 content and our original Cooler Master NR200p Max content, we saw a lot of comments from people saying, oh, that's too expensive for a case. You are not just buying a case. So I've already talked about this to death, but if you do the math, you're getting a fairly decent cooler and an SFX power supply, which in itself is rather expensive, plus the case. If you were to buy those things separately, it would equal the price anyway. Speaking of, the NZXT H1 V2 is going for around 399 US dollars, or around 589 Australian dollars at the time of filming. That, in Australia at least, well, I can't remember what the original US price was, but in Australia, I think it's only $20 more expensive. I could be wrong, it could be the exact same price, but they did a far better job with the NZXT H1 V2 than they did with the original H1. And I think even if you have to pay an extra 20 bucks, it's worth it because the improvements are there. Extra cooling. Not only that, I didn't mention this before, but all of the holes on the side, you probably saw it in the side-by-side comparison, these holes are bigger. The surface area for intake is a lot larger too. So you are cramming a whole lot more air into this case. Let us know your thoughts on the NZXT H1 V2 in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. I think this is a nice improvement. Whether or not you are buying this new or upgrading, that's completely up to you. If you've already got an H1, I would say probably don't upgrade to this. Get something like the A4 H2O. Realistically, you could transplant the power supply out of your H1 into those anyway. Also, I wanted to mention the reason why this video is so delayed is this got stuck in shipping for months and we just had to wait, and it only arrived a few days ago, and the first chance that I could get, I was chomping at the bit. I wanted to talk about this case. And yeah, we did it as soon as possible. But if you guys enjoyed the video and you enjoyed the music, you can get early access to videos just like this one over on Flowplane. You can grab new music by clicking the join button or by clicking the Patreon thing down below. And if you like the video, smash the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, get yourself subscribed, ring that little bell. And I want you to do one thing for me today, guys. See this graph right here? Look at the graph. Look at the graph. I don't want to do this too much. I just need to remind you that there's a lot of people that watch the channel that just don't click the subscribe button. Click it. It costs you nothing, right? I know you guys come back all the time to watch the content, so just do me a favor and subscribe. Because at 200k subs, I'm gonna give away a gaming PC, so make sure you're subscribed. Anyways, guys, I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peek, we seek, and I hope you enjoyed another NZXT H1 video. You remember, Claire, when I kept saying, oh, I'm never doing another H1 video ever again? And then NZXT's like, hey dude, here's a curveball. Here's a new H1 that you gotta talk about. So here it is. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching.